All right, welcome back to Generation Unfiltered. It's a series where we sit down and talk with athletes at every stage of their journey, talk about life, health, their passions, and of course, some sports. I'm Nina, the founder of Generation Sport, and joining us today is Kristi Kirshe. She's a two-time Olympian and member of USA Sevens Rugby. Welcome, Kristi.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. I want to dive straight into kind of your sport journey for anyone who doesn't know. I read that you grew up playing tons of sports. You had a really diverse athletic background, everything from like Pop Warner football as a kid to playing competitive soccer at Williams in college. I want to understand a little bit, how has that variety shaped your athletic development? Has it been an advantage as a rugby player now?
I mean, I actually think growing up playing basically every sport I could get my hands on is kind of my biggest strength as an athlete. I think that there's kind of like a lot of pressure on athletes nowadays, especially younger athletes, to kind of start specializing from a young age. And I think that actually kind of does a disservice to young athletes because, like because I was playing all these different sports, I feel like I was a more well-rounded athlete and like purely from like a muscular and like movement perspective. So it's like injury preventative in that way. But I also think it kept the fun of sports for me for a longer time. You know, I think if you specialize like really early and you're kind of only playing one sport, it kind of starts to feel like there's so much pressure on that one sport. Soccer was kind of always the big one for me when I was a kid, but like I would go play basketball and I would go play lacrosse and like I said, like I grew up playing Pop Warner football. So I think having all those sports really kept the fun in it for me, all the way through high school in a way that like it didn't like I didn't burn out from like playing one sport too much. And I think that that is a really important part of like why I still love competing in the way I do. And I think, Pop Warner specifically, like I always say like I learned how to make a tackle when I was like 7 years old. I learned how to throw a stiff arm, and it kind of had like that baseline of like the contact sport element that, transitioning to a new sport at 23, having all that sport experience and everything, I think it was a huge advantage to me and part of the reason why I was able to kind of pick up rugby and kind of run away with it so quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you bring up like the pressure now for so many kids to specialize from an early age. I think like I felt something similar. I played tons of sports growing up. I had to trial a lot of things to find the things that I liked, and
Hmm.
then ended up kind of doing gymnastics and then the competitive equestrian route pretty seriously. And I would never have imagined how important being a gymnast was to creating a strong physical base as an equestrian. I think like equestrian sport doesn't always build the most muscle. It's not the most like physically rigorous one. The horse is doing a lot of work, but being a gymnast before like really set me up with a good foundation to be more competitive than I would have been otherwise. So I definitely appreciate the ability to try different sports, to kind of keep a love of just sport as a whole and
Hmm.
not feel like your body's under so much pressure from doing the same repetitive practice and movement over and over again. So I think it's such a cool journey to see that you've been on, and we'll get into a little more later about how you came into rugby.
I really do credit my family a lot for kind of the path that I was on. I grew up, I have two older siblings. Both my parents were sporty. They both played soccer when they were in college at Cornell. So I grew up in an athletic household. But I also think like, I grew up as a sideline kid. Like both my older siblings, like I was always the kid on running around on the sideline for their games and stuff. But I think there were a few like critical moments in my childhood that my parents kind of fought against kind of the pressure of coaches to allow me to keep playing other sports. There were like a few critical like impasses where somebody was like, "Oh, you really should be playing more soccer. You should really be making this higher level team X, Y, and Z." And my parents really kind of fought against that and really like supported me continuing to play the other sports. So I just wanted, to really like shout out that parenting because I think I wouldn't be here if they hadn't done that when I was a kid.
Yeah, no, parents are kind of like the hidden engine, not always hidden, but a lot of times hidden engine behind a lot of like really successful sport careers. And I imagine like as a parent, it's not easy always if, coaches who are meant to be the experts are pushing in one direction. So I really love that your parents were able to kind of create that space for you to keep a love of sport and keep a love of competition and just
Hmm.
try everything and make sure that having fun was kind of at the center of it and it wasn't all just pressure from a young age. And you said they're both competitive athletes. I want to know a little bit like What was that like growing up? Was there, that dream to also become a competitive athlete or a professional athlete, or is that something that kind of came up later in life?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, growing up as a sideline kid, just growing up on the sideline of all types of sports, it was always the thing that I was like the most excited to do. Watching my siblings play, I couldn't wait till like I was old enough to get on the
Right.
field, and then once I was old enough to get on the field, it was like I was like, yeah, like this is the thing I'm meant for, is to be running around on a field like this. So yeah, it was always a dream of mine to be a competitive athlete, and like really for me it was to be an Olympic soccer player. Growing up, that was really the gold standard, that was really the dream. Especially because like the 1999 Women's World Cup soccer team, like I was 5 years old when that happened. So
Yeah.
like just old enough to kind of see that on like the biggest stage. And so yeah, so I think that that was like a really important like visual for me as a kid. And then yeah, I think I always just wanted to keep playing sports for as long as I could. So being a professional athlete was absolutely my childhood dream.
Amazing. Yeah, it seems like so many of us have this like pivotal memory or moment of that game that you watched or that time that like you saw a recording. For me, I think it was like an old recording of one of the Atlanta Olympics. And so I think just like another
Mhm.
plug for why the representation is so critical and why making sure that these games are televised and they're available to the public is so important. Cool. I want to talk a little bit about transitions, because you mentioned your dream was being an Olympic soccer player, and obviously, like, you've made the Olympic dream, but in a really different way. So, from what I understand, you graduate from Williams, you don't go straight into playing rugby. You actually end up getting a job at a law firm, and I think a lot of athletes who are competitive all throughout their youth and through college, we feel like a real sense of loss when we're not in that environment of structured sports. I want to hear a little bit like, what was that experience like leaving college, leaving soccer? Did you actually leave soccer? Did you keep playing? What kind of happened there?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really tough time. It was definitely a time that I struggled with a lot. It felt leaving college and kind of leaving competitive soccer in the way, or a competitive sport in the way that I had kind of grown up with my entire life. It kind of felt like I was losing like a critical part of what made me me. And so I think that there's like this weird identity crisis that kind of happens in that time, and in that time of transition, when you've been an athlete for your whole life and then all of a sudden you aren't, just like on a random day in November, like my sports career is kind of over. So I think that was really hard for me to kind of grapple with. And when I graduated, I started playing like once a week, kind of like pickup soccer, and to be honest, it just like wasn't enough for me. I just had this like nagging feeling that like my competitive, like I wasn't done with competitive sports, and I didn't really know how to channel that, and I just wasn't getting it in, pickup soccer once a week. It just wasn't, you know, um, it wasn't scratching that itch in the way that I really wanted to. So, honestly, naturally, what I did was I complained to my friends. What we all do when we're kind of going through a crisis is I started complaining to some of my friends about it. And luckily, I have really good friends, because one of my best friends from high school, she had played rugby in college. She had played club rugby in college. So she was actually the one who was like, hey, like, I have some friends who play for this Boston women's team. They have practices twice a week and they have games on weekends. It'll feel a lot more like an actual competitive schedule that you're used to, as opposed to just kind of like a pickup type of sport. She was like, why don't you go give rugby a try? And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, I am a soccer player. I am too old to be learning a new sport. And, there was actually like that fear as well. I was like, I can't pick up a new sport. I can't learn how to do something new. Like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Like, I'm too old to be picking up a new sport. So there was like that fear too. And then there was kind of like, but then, at the end of the day, it was the like just that nagging feeling that I feel like I still had some competitive athlete in me, that eventually just, got me to that first practice. And then it was kind of a whirlwind from there and everything. But yeah, it was a really hard time. It really was a loss of identity. And, I think it's almost one that I have now delayed. I do fear for myself in, however many years I am actually done playing now international, like professional rugby. Like, I don't know, like, I feel like I've kind of actually pushed off that transition a little bit. I got a taste of it and I was like, nope, absolutely not. I'm gonna keep playing.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a really important conversation because I do think it's a really common thing that people struggle with.
No, completely. And like, I think it's inevitable, like, eventually you stop playing sport at some competitive level or you're like dialing it back. You know, we all try and do it as long as possible. And I think at any stage, like whether it's a voluntary, I'm retiring or you get an injury that kind of keeps you from being able to continue figuring out how to keep that like competitive spirit and edge in other parts of your life and kind of scratch that itch, as you say, is completely a journey. I don't think any of us have it figured out. And I've loved seeing tons more resources coming up for people transitioning out of sport,
Hmm.
finding ways to still be involved even if you're not a player or to be involved in the greater community. I think it's super cool to just see that there are ways to continue. And I think like once an athlete, always an athlete, and that mindset
Hmm.
applies to so many different aspects of life. Just trying to figure out like where you put it to use. I'm pretty excited having a first kid to be really competitive with him. And to kind of like beat him in a foot race. So that's where I'm channeling my competitive energy right now. Talking a bit more about women's rugby, it's been around for a while. The program in the US is obviously like top notch for years, but it feels like it's really having its kind of mainstream moment right now. Like you have the bronze medal at Paris, which is, the culmination of years and years and years of hard work and great programming. You've got Alona on Dancing with the Stars and having like huge media run. I saw Women's Elite Rugby 15s launching this year. Michelle Kang puts a massive investment into women's rugby, but we haven't had a huge tradition of the sport like some other nations, New Zealand, Great Britain, have had. Are we starting to now see the impact of that mainstream attention on the development pathway for the sport and kind of getting younger girls into it compared to like when you were growing up playing sport, or have we not really seen that play out yet?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we talked about kind of in the last 4 years leading into the Paris Olympics. It's actually it's something we talked about before the Tokyo Olympics as well. But especially as like a sport in the U.S., like the best, like we always knew the best way to get Americans to give rugby a chance was to medal on like the biggest stage, which is the Olympics. Americans love the Olympics. People get so excited to watch them every year and like watch, us get represented. And so we always knew that that was like our opportunity to kind of put rugby on the map. But like that part, so like winning a bronze medal obviously was like a culmination of, years of people working towards this dream and years of people building this program that we have now. And that was really a culmination moment where it's like, yeah, like we did this, we put it on the map. And also, to be fair, like we also put it on the map in like the most dramatic way possible. And
Yeah.
so I knew that that would make it even more viral. We could have won that game by 30 points and it would not have gotten the play that it got because we won at the last second. And, people love an underdog story. And I think that we kind of like channeled that throughout this Olympics, which I thought was really cool. But that definitely put it on the map. And then obviously, Alona being who she is and being such an amazing role model for young girls and such an advocate for the sport and just kind of women in general, I think we're definitely seeing the impacts of that. Just the fact that people even know what rugby is. Rugby wasn't even on my radar, honestly, like as a kid. It wasn't even on my radar until I was literally 22, 23 years old. When I was in college, it wasn't even on my radar. So the fact that it's even on people's radar now and that more young girls are taking a chance on rugby and, we have more athletes who kind of maybe are no longer playing their sport, but also feel like me and like they still have something to give or they still have some competitive left in them. I think you're starting to see more of those people kind of take a chance on it and really fall in love with it because rugby's not just a sport that's it has such an amazing culture as well and such a supportive culture and we play an international World Series, we play against all these teams from around the globe, but we always have a social with them after the end of every tournament, like, and we're the professional athletes. And so I think that that just like really is an overall like very special part about rugby, and I think just seeing more people start trying it and fall in love with it, like we're definitely starting to see that in the US, and it's only the first year after it. So like you think about kind of you get the ball rolling and kind of looking at where we'll be by the time we get around to 2032 Olympics. Like I think you'll just see so much more support for rugby. And I think so many more athletes that make it even more competitive in the US to make this team, to play on this team, and to play on the world stage. So we really have been feeling the impact. And I think it really is just such an exciting time for women's sports in general. So I think the fact, sometimes they say everything happens for a reason, but the fact that we did this right during the time that women's sports is really having a moment, I think is also really important to how this is kind of all building on each other for
Yeah.
rugby, especially in the future.
It's been so exciting to see the momentum. Like you said, rugby wasn't on your radar for, most of your childhood, maybe into college. Like I think rugby came onto my radar when I started dating a rugby player in college and have slowly gotten more and more into it. Sevens is particularly such an exciting, fast-paced game. So plug there. If anyone hasn't gone and seen your Olympic bronze medal match, you should definitely go and see that. That was 14 minutes of just intense sprinting and pure joys. And I'd love to hear, is there anything else like you'd like to see happen to continue to grow the program here in the States?
I think the earlier we can get a rugby ball in people's hands, we're only going to see better rugby players kind of come through the programs. But I also think investing in college rugby and investing in girls at that age is really important. And I think it does offer such a unique sport to women to be able to play in college. And so I do think that that's like a really important pathway. And
Mm.
I think just honestly, like we don't have kind of the system that like a US we compare ourselves to soccer a lot, but we don't have like the grassroots system that like a US soccer has. So I think really building that like full grassroots from like that you start playing rugby when you're this old. This is the next opportunity when you're in middle school. This is the opportunity when you're in high school. These are the opportunities when you're in college, and kind of building that path so that you know we're not getting players who had just picked up a rugby ball for the first time when you're 23, because I think the more that I can be the exception and not the rule, I think the
Yeah.
better we're going to get as a rugby country in general. So, and I also think a lot of it does come down to investment. We got like a major investment from Michelle King, which has been amazing. And I think it's helped grow our program. It's helped our athletes who are, we're doing this full time. This is our full-time job, but like we're not paid like a professional baseball player or a professional soccer player. So allowing this to kind of be a dream too. I think supporting like our program as well, of like allowing this to be something that people can aspire to, and for it to be a career that people can kind of pursue without having to kind of sacrifice financially like a lot of people have had to do in the past. I think that's really important as well. So just kind of, yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's kind of like an all-encompassing thing. Like we haven't even fully built out the structures that are going to allow people to kind of flow through rugby into this program. So I think really focusing on like that part of like actually building out the foundation for people to kind of work through, I think would be really important.
Yeah, it makes so much sense because I think a lot of people when they hear professional athlete, they think like big sponsorship deals and that you're getting paid to play. And a lot of times, like so many pro athletes are sacrificing a ton and working multiple jobs in order to be able to play. And you're really playing, for the passion of the sport. It's super cool to just imagine the acceleration we're going to see in the sport from there. I think also coming up, LA 28, can't wait for it to be on home turf for the Olympics, and think that's hopefully going to drive some momentum there. What's like the biggest myth or misconception about women's rugby that you would like to debunk for people?
But I knew like this is a really hard question. Because I don't know that I necessarily have a really good answer. Um, but I think in general, I would say that playing this sport means you can't be feminine. I think we have so many different people on our team. We have so many different body types. We have so many different backgrounds. We have so many different expressions of femininity on the team. And I think that we in general are an important and diverse representation of kind of women as a whole. And so I think that's what I would want to debunk, is that like this sport doesn't make you any less feminine, or honestly it's like it's such an embrace of what the female body can do, and it's not about what your body looks like, it's about how powerful you can be, and like powerful women and muscular women and strong women are celebrated. And I think just kind of the myth that like you can't be feminine and play rugby. I think it actually is like the greatest expression of feminism of, you know, just seeing how everybody can kind of express that in their own way within the sport and be celebrated for it.
No, I think it's such a cool expression of, like you said, what power looks like, and that power can look different in so many different ways, whether you're like involved. You're going to hear like my very limited rugby knowledge here and rugby terminology, but whether you're like deep in a scrum or you're like sprinting down the field, that can look so different, and different body types perform in so many different ways. I think being able to show that expression of the female body and that it can be so many different things and it can be so dynamic is super cool. So I love that you brought that up. I want to talk a little bit too, kind of about mindset. I'd listened to, you had this really good podcast episode with Hannah Donnelly on the On Her Mark podcast. And for anyone who hasn't heard it, I'll make sure to link it in the comments. And I really liked what you said about opening yourself up to possibilities. And that you had the story about writing this note before Paris saying that you were going to win a medal, and that it was one of the scariest things to like write down and put into the world. I would be terrified to do that. I think that fear can really hold us back. And I know mindset is so critical to sport. A lot of it's physical, but a lot of it is also your mental state. Was that, something that you've done before? Was this the first time you tried it? And what was that experience like?
It was the first time I've ever done something like that. The
Okay.
first and only, so I don't know what that says about how powerful it is, but it was terrifying. And I guess I couldn't even fully explain to you why I did it. I think, we had a lot of conversations with our team, like sports psych, leading into the games. And I think that it is a really scary experience to kind of lay out what you want and like what your dreams are, because it opens us up to that kind of like innate fear of failure that we all have. But I think for me, when I wrote that like the day before, or like the day before we left. So it was like one of the last things I did before we like left to like literally fly to France. It was scary because I was like, oh man, like I was thinking about it while I was there, and I was like, oh man, if I go back and see that, I'm probably gonna tear that off the wall and like be so upset about it. But I think it was just kind of like, it's like that idea of like daring to do and daring to dream. And, I wanted to be like, I am absolutely going for this. Like, I'm going to give everything I have in pursuit of this. Like, we are going to do this. And I think belief is so incredibly powerful. And yeah, but like, it was terrifying. It was in the back of my head so many times. And so I don't know that I'll ever do it again, to be honest, because I was stressing about it.
Mhm.
But I think it did open me up to like a whole level of like, I'm kind of surrendering myself to what the outcome is, but this is my intention, this is what I want, and this is what I'm kind of laying myself on the line for. And yeah, so I think uh it was definitely the first time I've ever done it, and I'm really glad I did.
Mhm.
But it was absolutely terrifying, and I think it does relate to basically any dream that you kind of put out loud, whether
Mhm.
it's you're afraid of failing for yourself, you're afraid of telling other people and then them knowing you failed, whatever it is. I do think it opens us up to that fear of failure. But if you're not like aware that you're afraid of that, you don't really know how bad you want something. So I think that was a really powerful kind of mentality to go into the Olympics with.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's like the flip side of it. It creates an immense pressure. So I totally understand not wanting to do it again. I think we see on social all the time, where like I'm chronically on social media now, the idea of like manifesting everything. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on every time you say something that it has to happen, or you're making a prediction. And this is not that. It's more, like you said, putting your intention out, telling the world that you're going to put your best effort into doing this. You're going to leave it all on the field. Sometimes it's not in our control, but the fact that you put everything out there, I think is a really cool way to kind of reframe and take some of the pressure off. And I think that's like a lesson we can learn in our life, in sport, outside of sport, is just, it's okay to have big goals, and it's okay to want things, and to say that you want these things, and to be comfortable with, just because you want something and you're going to put your heart and soul into it doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but you can still say that those things are important to you. So I really liked how you kind of framed it around intention. Kind of speaking outside of rugby a little bit, sounds like you took a little time off after Paris, well deserved. Anything you kind of like learned about yourself in that time? You pick up any new hobbies?
Yeah, I took what we call some veteran time off after Paris. It had like, kind of what we're talking about, it had been like a crazy buildup, I think people see the 2 weeks of the Olympics, or they see, we play for 3 days. We play 3 days, 6 games, and it's like they don't see the 98% of what happened the 3 years leading up of the work that kind of went into that. So kind of after Paris, I was like, I just achieved my lifetime dream. Like, I need to sit with this for a little bit, and I need to like just kind of soak it in. And also, like, I'm tired. You kind like I said, like for those 3 year or well, I keep saying 3 years because there was 3 years between the postponed Tokyo and Paris, but really it's like a 4 year cycle normally. And you really have to put everything else aside and be putting your all on the line to achieve this. And so it, I definitely was tired, and I definitely needed a break to kind of take a step away and be like, this is still what I want to be doing.
Mm.
So I think that that was really important for me. Also, my body needed a little break. Honestly, like I spent most of the fall in rehab or in like PT and doing like rehab on like one of my knees and stuff, and just like little things that kind of had popped up over the 4 years that I just kind of finally had time to like deal with without like being like,
Yeah.
okay, I gotta be back on the field next week. What can we do? Like, um, so yeah, so I wouldn't really say I did anything crazy. I think I traveled more than I normally travel. We're in San Diego full time, but my family's all back in Massachusetts. So I got to go home more times than I probably have in the last 3 years. I think in like the 4 months I was off, I think I went home like 4 times, which was like really special. Um, so yeah, so like I just like kind of getting the opportunity to kind of do some of those things and kind of go like experience a little bit of like the world, but then kind of have the time away to kind of make sure that mentally when I came back, I wasn't coming back right into like the grind, but I was coming back because I wanted to come back and I was excited to come back, and I still had that itch and desire to keep competing. And so I think that that was really important for me to realize that I was away for not even that long and I missed it so much that I couldn't wait to get back. So I think I didn't really pick up any new hobbies or anything. I just kind of, like I said, I traveled a little bit more than I normally do. I got to spend some more time with like friends who aren't in the program anymore. But really, it was mostly physical and mental. Like my body just kind of needed a break, and I kind of just needed to like recommit to doing this for, another 4 years. I kind of just needed a little bit of a break in order to kind of do that.
But I like that you bring up how a break can really be like a great refresh and reset. I think it's super important. We probably don't give ourselves enough time to one, just like deal with life admin and just like make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And then two, just take that time away that gives you the perspective. Sometimes I felt like when I would take a break from writing or anything I do now, really, that I'm really invested in. Sometimes you come back better, even like you get that perspective when kind of gives you that chance to think about like, oh, am I doing this, the way I want to be doing it? Is this the thing that I love? And I love hearing that even just a little break made you miss it. I think that's such a good feeling. It's how sport stays fresh. It's how you don't burn out in sport as much or learn to kind of fall out of love with the sport. So really glad that you had that time and also time to go see family. I know you're traveling a ton. You're with the team all the time, which kind of brings me to one of our last questions. I mean, obviously you all play well together. It also looks like you have a ton of fun together as well. I know it's hard to ask you to pick a favorite memory, but I'm going to like what's peak memory for you with the team or just something that you'll kind of always cherish beyond playing the sport?
Oh, yeah. I'd say it's really hard to pick one moment. I think one of the things that I'm proudest of the Olympics was not just that we won a medal, but like how we won a medal. Like I do think that you really got to see our team's personality and like how much we love each other. And I think that that was really like a special thing for us to be able to show the world. So, like that's definitely one of the things I'm proudest of. Like we did it our way, and I think that that was really special. I think it's so hard for me not to honestly just pick like that moment that Spiff scored the winning try and we were all just like on the field sobbing because that was a really special moment. And like
Mm.
that's a moment I'll never forget that feeling. I'll never forget like that joy. But I think like to be honest, it's not like one moment. It really is like, I'm with these people every single day. We go to work together, we travel the world together. We've seen each other through the highs, through the lows. We make fun of each other, we support each other, and I think it's really the everyday that is the
Mm.
most special to me. And just like I get to go to work every day with like my best friends and like people that have become my family. And I know like 20 years from now, I could call any single one of them and they would show up for me tomorrow. And I think that that's like such a powerful feeling. And yeah, we've
Mm.
just been through so much together, like so many terrible days, so many great days. And so I really just think I can't pick one moment because it's really just all of it. It
Yeah.
really is. But if you're really forcing me to pick a moment, it's going to be that moment on the field when the final whistle blew and we had done the thing. I was a blubbering baby. I don't know if you can hear it or see it, but I'm getting emotional just thinking about it right now. So,
That's incredible.
um, yeah.
And I bet like also those, those difficult moments of like every day, the grind of practice and just like being with these people, then having that huge moment shared with all these same people, it's just got to be like the absolute icing on it. Where not only are you experiencing your own dream come true, that you had since you were a kid, but you're experiencing it with your best friends who have all been working together towards this. And I love that like sport allows us all to share that moment with you, which is just incredible. And it's also like a lot of, I think, what we believe in, where sport is, it's not just about playing, it's about those lifelong friendships and relationships that you build along the way that kind of are that lasting joy. And I think it's like one of the beauties and why I always feel like everyone should try a sport at any level, because you feel that from like playing little league all the way to being a
Hmm.
professional athlete. So I think such a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for the time. This was a fantastic conversation. I think so much insight and a ton of inspiration. I am looking forward to seeing the next generation of girls grow up with rugby and with you and Team USA as role models. I think you all are doing it so gracefully, and I'm just so excited to see where you go next. Thank you, Kristi.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the very thoughtful questions and ending on getting me emotional.
That was the
But
goal.
no, yeah, but no, seriously, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.